Okay, we talked about yesterday, if a person has 4 tefachim of not kosher schach in the middle of his sukkah, is it a problem? Or is it only a problem to have not kosher schach in the middle of his sukkah if he has 4 amas, but each amma is about 1.5 to 2 feet? So that would mean about 6 to 8 feet of not kosher schach would be a problem, but anything less than that would be okay. So the Gemara bottom of Yud Zayin Amud Beis, about 3 lines up, says, Tashma, Succah ben Asarim shel Eresh Sheish ben Daled Divrei Kol Psula. That if a person has a board which is 4 tefachim wide, then everyone agrees that it's a problem. Ein behen Daled, if the board is less than 4 tefachim, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, Rabbi Meir says it's a problem. Rabbi Yehuda says it's okay. This was a Gemara earlier on Yud Daled, which talked about which cases the Rabbanan make a concern that a person will get confused between his sukkah and his house. Okay, the part which the Gemara by us is going to focus on is the top of Yudches. Modeh Reb Meir, sheyesh beineser leneser kemolei neser, sheminiach psal beineim v'kshever. The Brisa says that everybody agrees that if you put a 4 tefach board, which is not kosher schach, but then in the next 4 tefachim, the person filled it with kosher schach, and then he continued with a 4 tefach board of not kosher schach, and then a 4 tefachim space of kosher schach, the sukkah is kosher. So if I look from a bird's eye view at my sukkah, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see a 4 tefach space of filled with a not kosher schach, then a 4 tefach space filled with kosher schach, and I'm going to continue every other throughout the sukkah. So the Brisa told me that sukkah is 100% kosher. So ask the Gemara, that if you tell me that the only time not kosher schach in your sukkah is going to be a problem is if there's 4 amas of not kosher schach, then I understand why it's kosher. Because if you look at my sukkah, I have a whole bunch of pieces of not kosher schach, which each one is only 4 tefachim, so it's less than 4 amas. But ask the Gemara that if you tell me 4 tefachim of not kosher schach is already a problem, so why is this sukkah kosher? The Brisa said if you filled up your sukkah with a 4 tefach board, and then 4 tefachim of good schach, then 4 tefachim board, then 4 tefachim of good schach, the sukkah is kosher. If having 4 tefachim of not kosher schach in your sukkah makes your sukkah not kosher, so then why would it be in this case the sukkah is kosher? My sukkah is filled with 4 tefachim boards, which midirabanan is schach posel, it's not kosher schach. So the Gemara says, from the Brisa, it would seem to be a proof, like the opinion, that the only time not kosher schach in a sukkah is going to make the sukkah not kosher is if there's 4 amas. And since in this case, at most in one place, there's 4 tefachim, therefore the sukkah is kosher. My answer is no. Now the case is that the sukkah is 8 amas exactly. V'yohiv neser upsal v'neser upsal v'neser upsal mehai gisa. He started from one side with a not good schach, then good schach, not good schach, then good schach. V'neser upsal v'neser upsal v'neser upsal mehai gisa. And then he started from the other side and did the same thing. Not good schach, not good schach, good schach. Tahavulu shnei psalim be'emtza. And therefore, he ended up with a good sukkah in the middle. Just hold on 1 second. Therefore, he has a good sukkah in the middle. In other words, if you have 8 amas, each amma is 6 tefachim. So 6 times 8 is 48. Okay, so we have a 48 tefach sukkah. Now, 4 amas is 24 tefachim. Okay, so I have a 48 tefach sukkah. If I cut it in half, then I have two halves of 24. Okay? If I hit 24 tefachim, then I cannot say dofen akuma, because dofen akuma you can say up until 4 amas, which is 24 tefachim. So it says the Gemara, you have 48 tefach sukkah, cut it in half. So we have 24 tefachim. Okay, so let's start from this side with our 24 tefach half sukkah. So I did not kosher, 4 tefachim, kosher, 4 tefachim. So now I'm at 8, not kosher, kosher, not kosher. So that gets me to 20. Right, I did 5. Not kosher, kosher, not kosher, kosher, not kosher. So I'm holding at 20 tefachim from my wall. Then I put a board of kosher. Okay, now I start from the other side. I do the same thing. Not kosher, kosher, not kosher, kosher, not kosher. So I'm holding 20 tvachim from my right wall. Then I put a kosher board. So if I look at a bird's eye view, the middle of my sukkah is 2 kosher boards next to each other. Outside of those, I have a combination of 5 different boards, which it doesn't really matter what they are. It would be the same thing if they were all not kosher, but in the Brisa's case, it was kosher, not kosher, kosher, not kosher, kosher. So what the Gemara is saying is the case of the Brisa is, since in the middle of my sukkah I have 2 kosher boards together, which together is 8 tvachim, which is big enough for a sukkah, and all the things outside I can say dofen akuma aren't, so that means consider it as if that's part of my wall. So that's why the sukkah is going to be kosher. The Gemara in the question was asking that if you say 4 tvachim of not kosher schach is a problem, so why is this sukkah of every other going to be kosher? The Gemara in the answer saying that since the sukkah is 8 amas exactly, and I'll tell you how the person in the case designed it. He designed it in a way that it's not really every other. It's every other, but he started from 2 opposite sides, which means by the time he got to the middle, the 2 boards were really both kosher schach. So then he can say dofen akuma on all the external boards, which makes it that his only real sukkah is that middle, and everything on the outside is really dofen akuma, which means halachically it's part of his walls, and therefore there's really no schach puzzle. There's no schach which is not good in his sukkah, because his sukkah is that middle, which is the two four pieces of kosher schach. Everything on the outside is not really his sukkah. So if he asks me where can he sit, right? He looks up and he sees this big sukkah, but really he can only sit in the 8 tfachim in the middle of a sukkah, which is very, very, very small. Okay, so even though his roof looks like it's 48 tfachim wide, halachically his sukkah is the middle 8 tfachim, and the rest is really considered his walls. So that's how the Gemara is answering. That's the case of the Brisa. Okay, so meaning in halacha we paskin that 4 tfachim of not kosher schach would yes be a problem in the middle of a person's sukkah. We don't hold like the more lenient opinion of 4 amas. It's not so common that people would have not kosher schach on purpose in their roof. The easiest way to have it would be from a Gemara earlier, from the Gemara Daf Tes, which talked about having a tree over a person's sukkah. Which would a tree? I mean, it's dependent a little bit on the different opinions how to understand that Gemara. But what a tree does is it makes the kosher schach under the tree as if it's not kosher schach. So here's where the question would come up: that if a person has enough of a tree hanging over his sukkah, now it's a little difficult because you have to be able to figure out what's directly above my schach. In other words, if you're eyeballing it, it's not so easy. The tree's 30 feet up to figure out where exactly the tree is. Okay, so I know some people, they use what builders use, which is a laser. That goes like at a 90-degree angle, exactly straight up. But this is where it would be more relevant. If a person would have a tree over a sukkah, and you have a way to calculate which parts of the tree is going to make that schach not kosher schach, then you have to start measuring, well, how much not kosher schach do I have, which could potentially make the whole sukkah not kosher if it's up to 4 tefach. Okay, Omer Abai, Avir Shlosha, Besukkah Gedola, says Abai, if a person has a space of 3 tefachim in a big sukkah, which we learned yesterday in the Mishnah, that's a problem. Miyat tobein bakana bein b'shvudim havi miyat, and he filled it in, whether it was with good schach, whether it was with not kosher schach, either way it solved the problem. Because if it's with good schach, so then he has more kosher schach, which is good, and he just has a little bit of space. If he filled it in with not kosher schach, the reason that's good is like the Gemara we learned yesterday, that if you have 2 different tracks, one is less than the amount of space, and one is less than the amount of not kosher schach, they don't add together to create a problem, and therefore, if you would measure the whole thing, it would look like a problem, but each one by itself is really 100% fine. Just want to clarify one thing. There's 2 different conversations a person could have. One is my sukkah kosher? The second conversation is, where in my sukkah am I allowed to sit? Okay, so tomorrow's daf, it's going to touch upon this question, which is if I have space in my sukkah, am I allowed to sit under that space or not? Okay, that's a second question, which is after you tell me my sukkah is kosher, now you can tell me where should I position my chair. Am I allowed to position it under the schach puzzle? Am I allowed to position it under the avir or not? Today's conversation is just, is my whole sukkah kosher, not kosher? At least can I sit under the schach parts of my sukkah? Okay. Sukkah ketana, if a person has a minimum size sukkah, b'konim havi miyut, if he fills it in, so if he had 3 tfachim of not kosher schach, of avir, of space in his small sukkah, his 7 by 7 tfachim sukkah, b'konim havi miyut, if he fills it in with kosher schach, so then he solved the problem because now he has enough schach for his sukkah. B'shvudim lavi miyut, but if he fills it in with not kosher schach, it does not solve the problem. The reason is what we learned yesterday, is that the problem there is that he doesn't have enough kosher schach. So the only way to solve that problem is to add more kosher schach. Minimizing the space is going to help that there's not enough avir, but it's still not going to help the other problem, which is you need more schach to make your sukkah ketana kosher. Says the Gemara, Hani mili min atzad. When is this true? That's if the space, meaning if you have less than 3 tfachim of avir, it's okay, the sukkah is kosher. That's if the space is next to a wall. Aval be'emtza, let's say a person has less than 3 tfachim of avir in the middle of his sukkah, pligi ba ravacha v'ravina. There's a disagreement between Ravach and Ravina. Chad amar yesh lavud be'emtza, chad amar ein lavud be'emtza. One says you can say lavud even though it's in the middle of your sukkah, and one says you cannot say lavud in the middle of your sukkah. Meaning the Mishnah told us if you have avir, a space, which is 3 tfachim wide, it's a problem. That means less than 3 tfachim is okay. Now why is that okay? Because there's a halacha l'Moshe Messina called lavud, which has things less than 3 tfachim apart from each other, the halacha sees them as together. Now here we're having a disagreement. They both agreed that's true. If here's my wall, and here's my schach, and here's my little space, they both agreed if it's less than 3 tfachim there, you can say lavud. They're having a disagreement, which they'll explain to us where they're coming from. They're having a disagreement. Let's say it's in the middle of your sukkah. Can you say lavud in the middle of your sukkah? Or do we only say lavud on the part closest to the wall? So my time with the Manam Yesh lavud be'emtza. What was the source of the one that said you could say lavud even if it's in the middle? The Tanya, he learned in a brayso. Kara hayotzis mikosel zeh. Maishi sent it in? Okay, so Maishi sent out the pictures for us. This will be picture number 115, if anybody wants to take a look. Kara hayotzis mikosel zeh ve'ino nogas bekosel acher. So a person is putting up this beam to allow people to carry in this mavui, in this walkway. So if the beam is going out from one wall but does not touch the other wall, or you have 2 different beams coming out from each side, which don't come together, they don't totally touch each other. If the 2 beams are close enough, they're within 3 tfachim of each other, then that's okay. But if the 2 beams are more than 3 tfachim or more apart, so then a person does need to get more materials. So we're seeing in this brayso that you have 2 beams which are in the middle of the 2, there's a space less than 3, and the brayso is saying it's okay. So one Manda Amar is saying, from there I see, even though we're talking be'emtza, we're talking in the middle, still the halacha is saying lavud, which means see it as if the beam is really closed. So that's my source. So too by sukkah, that even though there's a space in the middle of the sukkah, that's okay. V'idach, and the other one responds, shiny kurs derabanan. I could tell you maybe that's by Erevin, where over there the whole problem was a derabanan problem. So maybe there was a leniency that you could rely on lavud. But over here where we're defining a kosher sukkah from the Torah, saying you don't have a source from there that's such a thing that you can say lavud even in the middle. Okay, so that was one of the person's sources, and the other one responded to the source. My time with the Madamar ain lavud be'emtza. And what's the source of the opinion that says you cannot say Lavid Be'emsa. This is picture 116. Titnan, Aruba Shebebayis, Uba Poseach Tefach. Okay, so you had an opening in the person's roof, which was the size of a tefach. Tumma Bebayis, if there's something that's tummy in the house. Let's say there was a person who passed away in the house. Kulo tummy. So the whole rest of the house, except under that, the place under that one opening is tummy. Mashekeneged aruba tahor. But the area which is directly under that opening of one tefach by one tefach would be tahor. Okay, so like in here, you imagine just one of these squares was cut out. Okay, and there was something in the room which would bring tumah to the entire room. So the whole building, anywhere which is under the roofing, the same roof would be considered one big room, and the tumahs everywhere. But what's under the one square directly down, imagine that square comes down, that's not defined as being in the same room, since there would be no roof overhead. And therefore things in that place under that square would be tahor. Tumah keneged aruba, and if the thing that the tumah would be under that square, kalabayis kulo tahor. So then there's no building which is hovering over the tumah. Ein baruba paseach tefach, and let's say that opening was less than the size of a tefach. Tumah bebayis keneged aruba tahor. Tumah meaning then if there's tumah and abayis still, the things under that opening are tahor. Tumah keneged aruba kalabayis kulo tahor. And if the mace, the person who passed away, was under that opening, then the entire house would be tahor. Okay, so meaning okay, let's see one more line. The Gemara responds, "Ve'idach shiny hilchas tuma tahachi gemiri lahu." Okay, so the Gemara was bringing a source. What was the source of the opinion that said you don't say love it in the middle? Because the Mishnah told me that if it was a tefach, then you see it as being open, and you don't see it as being part of the rest of the house. If you would say love it even in the middle, so then it's less than 3 tefachim. So even though you're right, there's a hole in the ceiling, but say love it, which would mean consider the ceiling as if it's closed. But you see from this halacha about tumah that we don't deal with it like that. So that's my source that you don't say love it in the middle of a roof. The Gemara responds, no, the other one said that's a specific halacha in the halachas of tumah, and therefore that's not a source for hilchas sukkah. Okay, so we have two different, a brisa and a mishnah. One sounds like you say love it in the middle, one sounds like you don't. They had their disagreement. Which one should you learn from for relevant to us? If you have avir, you have an opening of space less than 3 tefachim in the middle of your sukkah, is that going to be okay? Because you do say love it be'emsa? Or is that going to be a problem? Because if it's in the middle of the sukkah, you cannot say love it. Darish Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi said, if you had a house which part of it fell down in the middle of the room, you put kosher schach, you put your schach men on top of it, the sukkah is kosher. Rabbi Pirish Kach Pirish Abba, he explained arba amas psula pachas me'arba amas ksheira, that if the materials from your wall to the kosher schach is 4 amas, then it's a problem because that's too far to say dofen akuma, which means that your kosher schach is too far from your walls. But if that space is less than 4 amas, then it's going to be kosher, like we learned in the Mishnah yesterday. In other words, he was clarifying when he said the statement that the sukkah is kosher, he only meant, assuming you can say dofen akuma, to knock out the materials which are not good for schach, to get your wall close enough to your schach to be kosher. Darish Rabbi Yehuda bar Simloi, about 10 lines up from the bottom. Now we're quoting different things that Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi said. So he said avruma sharia. So avruma, Rashi says, is a type of small fish, which you would not be able to figure out if there was other types of bugs inside of them. But he's coming and saying that those things a person is allowed to eat, even though you can't figure out. you can't notice the bugs inside of them, it's okay. So why is that? Amr lefanav Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Pirush Kach Amar Abba, Shal Makam Ploni Asura. He said, if it's from that place where there's bugs, there's shrutzim that grow in that place where the fish are, then it's going to be a problem because you have to assume that there's going to be some bugs inside the fish and there's no way to check it. Shal Makam Ploni Muteris, but if it grows in a different place where in that river there's no types of the shrutzim which the Torah prohibits, so then it's 100% fine, even though you can't figure it out. But since you don't have to assume it's there in the first place, it's okay. Ki had Amar Abai, like Abai said, Haitzachanta. Rashi says there's a type of small types of fish. Debava Nara Sharia, of that river. The name was Bav. The river of Bav is okay. My taima. Why did he say that the fish in that river are okay? Ilay mishum de redifa maya. If it's because the water moves fast, of a high dog tummy, and a not kosher fish, came into less lechuta shedra lamoti kaim, not kosher fish, kosher doesn't have a chuta shedra, which is like the spine, makeup, so therefore a not kosher fish wouldn't be able to survive in the water which moves that fast. So therefore any fish that are there must be kosher. Says the Gemara, it's not true. Vakachazina dekoi. We look in those types of rivers where the water is yes moving fast, and we see not kosher fish. So he can't be saying, because the water moves so fast, it has to be the fish are kosher, because we've seen not kosher fish in that type of water. Maybe it's because that type of water was very salty. Since it doesn't have any scales, low matikoi, so maybe the not kosher fish would not be able to survive the salty water because of its makeup. Whereas it's not true. We found in salty rivers, not kosher fish without scales, which survived fine. He's saying because in that river he was talking about, there weren't shrutzim that grew there, and since there weren't shrutzim, which is the things you're not allowed to eat, that grew there, therefore he was saying kosher fish for the bugs because it was too small to check, because you don't have to assume that there was any shrutzim that grew there. It's okay. Okay, so we're using that to explain what Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai said. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai said these types of fish are okay. We're explaining if it grows in a place where normally there's no shrutzim, which normally there's no bugs, and therefore even though the fish is too small to inspect it to find for any bugs, but since you don't have to assume there's bugs inside of it, a person's allowed to eat it. Okay, 4 lines up from the bottom. Omer Ravina, va'idna de shavchi nar esan v'nahar gam de lahasa masira. But now that in that river, even though it doesn't produce shrutzim, those bugs, but since there's another river that flows into it, which the river that flows into it does have bugs, then you're not allowed to eat the fish from there. The fish which you cannot check to see if there's bugs inside, because you have to assume that even though the river which they grow in, which they were originally in, does not have bugs, but since there's another river flowing in with bugs, then you have to be choshish, you have to be concerned that the fish, the kosher fish you're eating, is really filled with shrutzim, which would be a problem. Okay, says the Gemara, Itmar, Sikech al gabi achsadra, sheish la patzim and ksheira. Okay, so the achsadra, and this is picture 117. Okay, so the achsadra was yesterday. Imagine you had your U shape of housing. Surrounding the housing, you had an overhang, also in the shape of the U, pointed towards the center. Okay, now on that material, you put your schachmet. So says the Gemara, if you put schach on your achsadra, which is your roofing outside your housing, sheyesh la patzim and ksheira. So the Gemara says, if there's patzimin, that's picture 117, which means you have your U-shaped house, which has a roof in the shape of a U. Holding up that roofing, so then that's really the roofing of your sukkah. And then when you put kosher schach in the middle, so then you're going to be 100% fine, because you made up your walls using lavud, that since you have a bunch of pillars, right? Imagine a person has a porch. Okay, so if your porch, assuming the height is high enough, okay, and the bars are within 3 tvachim, which normally they are, so person can technically make the walls of his sukkah. This might be a little more complicated practically, but just for this point, a person could technically make the walls of his sukkah using his porch surrounding. Because what do you have? You have a whole bunch of wood, metal pegs less than 3 tvachim from each other, assuming they hit 10 tvachim high, which might depend on the opinions of 10 tvachim, exactly how high your porch is. But assuming it goes all the way around and your schach would be directly above it, so then technically a person could make his sukkah without any privacy. In other words, everybody could see straight in because your wall could be here and the whole thing could basically be see-through. But that could be using love, and that could be the wall of your sukkah. So that's very similar to what the Gemara is describing. It's describing you have a whole bunch of pillars holding up this overhang, and then you put schach in the middle, so you're using the pillars, which are all within less than 3 tvachim from each other, as the walls of your sukkah. She'ein lahem patzimin. Let's say you don't have any pillars. Abaye Omar Ksheira. Abaye still says, even though it looks like you don't have any walls, it's kosher. We'll see in a second why that is. Rav Amar Psula. Rava says it's no good. Abaye Omar Ksheira. Amrinan Pitikra Yorid V'Sosim. Okay, so what this means, this is another halacha l'Moshe Messinai, which is called Pitikra Yorid V'Sosim. So Abaye is saying that even though it looks like you don't have any walls, because you have this U-shaped housing, inside the U-shaped housing, you have your, so to speak, your deck. In other words, the extension of the roof which goes around. In the middle, you placed your schach. Abaye is saying that thickness of the roofing, which is inside the housing, you can see it, there's a halacha that says you can see it as if that extends down, which means even though in my sukkah it looks like I have no walls, here it's very interesting that the roofing is actually serving as if it goes down, just serving as my wall. So that's Abaye. He says, Rav Amar Psula, lo amrina pitikra yord v'sosim. Rava says, I don't think you can use that to make a wall. Amrle Rava l'Abaye. Rava challenges Abaye. L'didachta amr pitikra yord v'sosim. According to you, that we do say you can go down, afilu hifches dofen and emtsoi. Would you even say it in a different case, where a person had a 3-walled sukkah, put up his schach, and the middle of his 3 walls, the middle of his U, fell down. Says Rav, are you going to say the sukkah is kosher because I can view the thickness of the schach as the pitikra, as the thickness of the roof, to allow it to go down to make the 3rd wall of a sukkah? Are you really dropping that as long as your schach is thick enough, then you can look at the schach because of a halacha, look at the schach as if it goes down to make a 3rd wall of your sukkah? Abaye says, even me who's saying it, I'm not going to say it in a case where the sukkah is wide open. I'm saying it in a specific case, which is in our case where it's surrounded by houses, and then you have the roof extension. So in that case, which is more enclosed, there's a halacha l'Moshe B'Sinai which says you can see the roof as if it goes down to make a wall. But if you have a sukkah in an open place, which only has 2 walls, Abaye says, I agree, you can't use the thickness of the roof to view it as if it goes down to create a 3rd wall. He says the Gemara, is it right to say that the disagreement between Abaye and Rava is really the same disagreement as Rav and Shmuel? To Itmar, we learned. Achsadra bebika, if a person had this achsadra, which imagine he had 4 pillars holding up a roofing. Okay, this is picture 120 if you have it. Okay, so it's just a roof being held up by the 4 corners by 4 different pillars. Rav marmuta latalto bekulo damrina pitikra yord v'sosim. Even though it looks like you have no walls, Rav says you can really carry inside of that place because you see the thickness of the roof as if it's the wall, and therefore you really have mechitzas, you have walls on Shabbos to allow you to carry. Shmuel Amar ematalton l'baladal aramas. Shmuel says, I disagree. I hold you don't view the thickness of the roof as if it's the wall, and therefore you're left with a place without walls, which means up until 4 ambas a person could carry. More than that, a person is not allowed to carry. So the Gemara is asking, is it right to say that the disagreement between Rav and Shmuel is really the same disagreement as Abaye and Rava? So the Gemara says, no. Aliba de Shmuel kuli al malo pligi, which means in Shmuel's opinion, who said that it does not serve as a wall. Abaye and Rav are going to have to agree that Shmuel's for sure saying that you don't see the thickness of the roof as if it's a wall. But keep pligia liba de Rav. They'll have their disagreement in Rav's opinion. Abaye ke Rav. Abaye will say, just like Rav there said that you can view the roof as if it's the wall to allow me to carry inside, so too, says Abaye, he would say regarding Sukkah, you can view the roof as if it's a wall to make the Sukkah kosher. The Rava Omer, and Rava will say, Ad kan lo kamer Rav Hasam elo de mechitzas lach sadru Davidi. Rava will say, even Rav, who allowed you to carry, I'll say the only time he considered the roofing as a wall is there where the roof was made for this place directly underneath it. Right? I wanted to make a shady place, so I built a roof with 4 pillars. So Rava says that even Rav, who said you can view the thickness of the roof as if it's the wall, that's because the reason he made that roof was to divide this place directly underneath it. But in our case, which was the U-shaped housing with the roofing, the roofing in the inside, the point of the roofing was for the placement underneath the roofing. I come and build a sukkah in the middle, supporting it on all the roofing. So it says Rava, to say that the thickness of this wall can serve as the wall of a place for my sukkah, which the purpose of this overhang was for its place, to extend it to use the thickness of this wall for the outer place, which is my sukkah, which was not the intention of my building of the achsadra, of my the patio or the extension of the roof, even Rav would not say in that case you could do that. Okay, so just to summarize, we found a machlokas Rav and Shmuel regarding Hilchas Shabbos, regarding what allows a person to carry. One opinion says you can, yes, view the roofing as an extension to allow a person to carry. Shmuel says you cannot. So in Shmuel, everyone's going to agree that you can basically never see the thickness of the roof as if it's the wall. In Rav, who said it regarding Hilchas Shabbos, you can see the thickness of the roof as if it comes down and as if it's the wall. Then we have a disagreement, Abaye and Rava, would he even allow it by Sukkah to make up a wall, or would he only say it by Hilchas Shabbos because there the roofing was made for that place which it's providing shade for? I made a roof here to provide shade for the place under. So maybe that's where Rav said you can see the roof as if it's the wall of that same place. And Rav is saying, but I don't think Rav would ever say it in our case, which is I made a roof here which had a thickness. The point of this roof was to provide shade for the place under. Somebody came later and said, oh, I'm going to use that to hold up my schach. So I put up my schach. So it says Rava, I don't think even Rav would ever say you can use the thickness of this roof for your sukkah, because the point of this roof wasn't made for your sukkah. The point of this roof was made to provide shade for the place under it. To go and say, I can use the thickness of this roof for a new place, which is your new sukkah, which you built in the middle, Rav is saying, I don't think even Rav would have ever said it in such a case. Okay, this is my last day for this trip. Thank you, everybody, for coming.